Well, what do we have so far? One, they're sequential, progressively more difficult, progressively more empowering. They're within our own circle of influence. And the last one is important. It reminds me of a Hindu legend. And this is a story of Brahma and 4 of the lesser gods. It's a very old legend. And what had happened was this. And man had misused his divinity. And so Brahma, the chief god, had made a decision to take the divinity of man and hide it somewhere where man would never look to find it. Now, there was a council meeting that had a big council meeting that made a decision, where should we hide the divinity of man? The lesser gods came together, and they thought, and the first one raised his hand. He says, I know where we should hide it. We should climb up to the very tallest mountain, and that's where we should hide it. And Brahma, the chief god, said, no, we can't hide that divinity at the top of a mountain because someday man will be able to climb to the top of every mountain, and he'll find it and misuse it again. Can't put it at the top of the mountain. Another one of the lesser gods raised his hand and goes, I know where we should hide it. He says, where we should hide it is, he said, we should bury it in the deepest sea. Brahma said, nice idea, but he says, I have a feeling that someday man will be able to go to the deepest sea, and there he will find his divinity, and he will misuse it again. Third lesser god, he says, I've got another idea. What is it? He says, I think we should excavate, and we should bury it all the way to the center of the earth, and we should dig that deepest hole, and that's where man will never find it. He says, good idea. He says, but I got a feeling that someday we're going to have machinery. We're going to be able to have abilities to be able to dig to the deepest depths, and there man will find it again, and he will misuse his divinity. We need to think of a place to hide this divinity where man will never look for it. How many people know where they were supposed to hide it? Turn to your neighbor and tell her. Deep within ourselves. Deep within ourselves. You see, these 5 moments of truth are deep within ourselves. Write this down. The very center circle is about looking at the core of the individual. The core of the individual. Who are you? And if we begin to look at who am I at my very core, I begin to have to ask myself a few questions. One in particular, what am I doing here? There was a story that was about Bob Hope. I love Bob Hope. Don't you love Bob Hope? And Bob Hope has been entertaining the troops for years. And in 1991, when the troops went over to the Persian Gulf, did anybody have anyone that went over? And you know what? Weren't we kind of left a little bit sad and afraid? Did you go? Anybody here go themselves? But whisked away over into a foreign country, into a war that we weren't even sure that we were fighting, and over here we were watching the news, we were hanging on to the news. We didn't even understand, and you know what? The men and the women that were over there in that war were not exactly sure what they were doing there. That's not a good fighter. Bob Hope went over and entertained the troops, and with him he brought a country western singer. And that country western singer's name was Aaron Tippin. You maybe remember this song. I won't sing it, but I'll read a few of the words. Aaron Tippin became very famous for this song. And he talked about his daddy when he talked in front of the troops. He says, Daddy never liked trouble. But if it came along, everyone who knew him knew which side he'd be on. He never was a hero, but a county shining light. And you could always find him standing up for what he thought was right. He'd say, you got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. You got to be your own man, not a puppet on a string. Never compromise what's right or oppose your family name. You got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. You know, my question to you is, what do you stand for? Because if you don't know what you stand for, you will fall for anything. You know, many times people think that there had to be a crisis in one's life before they would take that trip and look within. Anybody can relate to that? And Gerald Covey, many of you maybe have had an opportunity to hear him. He's a wonderful motivational speaker, Commander Covey. But Gerald Covey wrote a book that was called Beyond Survival, and he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he wrote this. He said, in his book Beyond Survival, he said, "The absolute test are those we face alone, without the support of others who believe as we do. There, the beliefs we hold most dear are challenged, so strengthened, so to be tempered, others to be abandoned, but all to be examined. From deep within, we claim the values that we know to be our own. Those are the ones by which we are willing to live or die." Do you know which ones you're willing to live or die by? Or have you been handed some that maybe your corporation told you to live by, your family told you to live by, your school system told you to live by, yet maybe you haven't had the time or taken the time or chosen to look at your own moments of truth and how you're living your life? Because I notice there's a lot of people saying they're out of balance. Their life is out of balance. First red flag is when your life is out of balance is that you haven't looked at the moments of truth.